All right, I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Eric Flamand, who has a PhD in computer science from INPG in France. He is the co-founder and CTO of Greenwaves Technologies.
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. So my talk today is going to be about how can we achieve ultra-low power inference at the very edge of the network for, a very obvious reason is autonomous system from a battery and connectivity point of view that can go everywhere. So first thing, who we are, I mean, we are a French-based startup in business since 2015. With the first product that we introduced a year ago and that we are ramping up in volume production today. So we are living in this nice place with mountain around. So our market vision is, currently, if you look at an IoT device, you have a number of cool data pipes like an urban IoT, variants of LTE, Sigfox, LoRa, etc., that can give you a byte, kilobyte per day, and this is all good for battery-operated sensors. At the same time, I mean, there is a growing demand. I mean, you don't want to have only IoT nodes that are sensing temperature, pressure. You like to sense richer data like images, sound, radar information. And for multiple reasons that I'm not going to detail, but that you easily understand, is understanding the content of this data. The big issue is that this data pipe is no more compatible with, this amount of data. So anyway, we need to do something. The point is here I have a bunch of tools. This workshop is about, CNN, but you have a bunch of techniques to basically analyze data and figure out what they mean from a user perspective. CNN, EM, weak predictors, etc. So the good news is we do have tools to turn big amount of raw data into few highly qualitative data. And this is becoming compatible with my data pipe. And it's solving, lots of things like responding to a demand, low operation cost, etc., all based on rich data sensors. The only issue I'm having now is that I need way more MIPS than what I can get from a traditional MCU, but I still need to have the power budget that I'm used to have on a microcontroller. So what can I do? Few introduction remarks, I mean, because we are focusing on the digital part, but we need to make sure that we are not solving second order or third order optimization problems. So first question, do we have sensors that are really milliwatt class object for image, for, vibration, for radar? The good news is, yes, we do have. You have milliwatt image sensors, you have milliwatt ultra-wideband radar. So here we are on the safe side. Other question is, do we have really low power radio? Yes, we do, providing that they support, connectionless mode where you are not forced to talk every, 2 seconds with a base station. So again, we are on the safe side, both for sensing and transmitting. So back to my point is how can we come up with, a reasonable amount of MIPS, of instruction per second within an MCU, a microcontroller power envelope. So we have came up with, our product line that we call GAP, which is basically, an hybrid of, let's say, something that looks like a microcontroller with the usual set of peripherals to simultaneously sense image, vibration, radar, etc., etc. The simultaneously is very important because this is opening opportunity to fuse multiple point of view on the same reality. And this MCU domain, I mean, it's, is where you run a small OS, where you take care about security, secure boot, where you manage energy, adapt voltage, adapt frequency. Yeah? So this is, what people usually call a microcontroller. But when you need more, we are throwing into the battle, a parallel processing structure that is in a separate power domain and in a separate frequency domain, which means that when you don't use it, it's off and it's not burning. And this is where you get the MIPS you need to solve your problem, thanks to a mixture of parallelization and vectorization. And possibly, if you want to go one step further, you may also throw into the battle more specialized resources typically for convolution. I mean, the good workhorse that will deliver, 5x5 convolution in a single cycle on a shoestring power budget. So, as I said, on the left-hand side, you do have a microcontroller with the usual characteristic of an ultra-low power MCU, that is giving you something that range in between 1 microampere when you are in deep sleep, or slightly more when you turn on a bit of retention. Here, the challenge is, can you wake up fast, as fast as possible? So you leverage on the duty cycling properties. Then when you turn on, you start sensing data, and you go through pre-analysis, as it was explained during the first talk, hierarchy, introducing some hierarchy in the power modes, depending on what you want to solve, is essential. So here you do pre-analysis. So typically, if you have voice, you will go through spectral analysis and figure out if your spectral distribution could be a voice. If it is not, you are back to sleep. If it is something that is a candidate, you turn on more compute resource, and this is where you will run inference or SVN or whatever you want. And so you smoothly cover a power range that goes in between microamp, that goes up to few tens of milliwatts. So this is our value proposal. And so now, so as I said, we do have a first product that is available since a year. It's a 55 TSMC 55 LP. It can operate anywhere in between 1 volt and 1.2 volt, and and it can deliver up to a maximum of 10, 12 giga operation per second. Again, in a power range that is in between 1 microampere and a few tenths of milliwatt. We do also have, application boards. A few things about our background. I mean, so we have been leveraging a lot on several open source projects. The first one is the RISC-V initiative, and the second is PULP, open source project. PULP standing for Parallel Ultra Low Power. And we have combined elements of our own, plus lots of the background of the PULP to turn an open source project into a product that we are shipping those days. Okay, so central to my talk is what are our view for what concerned energy optimization. So there are several levels on which we can play, and I will go one by one through them. First, as I said earlier, being able to stick to the demand, so being energy proportional is essential because, in the real life, you want to count people, you don't want to count people in a room in a continuous manner. You want to sample every 30 seconds, every 1 minute. So the rest of the time, you are asleep. I mean, so you need to sleep well, efficiently, you need to wake up fast, and your system level budget is going to be the sum of all those contributions. Then the second demand, as it was explained during the previous talk, there is some ISA specialization that you can play to increase efficiency, and efficiency is twofold: performance, but also energy. Then the third dimension is going parallel and going vectorial. Fourth dimension is, of course, using hardware accelerator whenever it makes sense. And the last dimension, which is a little bit more subtle, is what you can get from explicit memory management in order to stick to the absolute minimum from a bandwidth point of view across the memory hierarchy. So proportional to the demand, as I said before, I mean, we are having systems that are characterized by duty cycling. So, you know, I want to be in sleep mode with fast wake-up capability, with something that is in between 1 and 50 microwatts. And here it is proportional to the level of retention you want to support. Then you might need to go through a coarse grain classification. So figure out if there is something relevant that you should look at more carefully, but you don't want to throw a complex tool to solve the problem. You want to use a coarse grain classification as it was explained during the first talk. Yeah? Here you will burn something that is in between, you know, a couple of hundreds microwatt to a few milliwatts. And finally, you know, keeping in mind that you have rejected, let's say, 90% of the cases thanks to coarse grain classification, you want to go to full-blown analysis, and here you will be in between 5 to 50 milliwatts. Huh? So you are smoothly escalating the resources. Huh? Of course, this is assuming that you can switch from one mode to another mode in an ultra efficiently, typically microsecond or you know, or tenths of microsecond scale. So let me switch now to the second level, which is the lightweight ISA specialization. So for what we are after, which is content understanding, there are a couple of things that really matter. Of course, signal processing, because you know, signal processing is going to be an integral part of the front end. So take you know, audio before doing anything with a CNN, you need to perform Mel coefficient extraction. So this is DSP. So this is one dimension that needs to be improved. Of course, linear algebra for obvious reason, because it's central for you know, several type of classification. And the last dimension is playing with the opportunity of reduced precision, which means offering some lightweight vector support. Huh? So what we have been doing is along those three dimensions, and this turns, you know, if I take a reference architecture, the gate count increase is approximately 30%. So this is reasonable. And then, I mean, let's see what it means from a practical point of view. I've been using here a set of well-known kernels that cover, you know, convolution, traditional convolution, binary convolution, pooling, etc., etc. And I've been trying to figure out if I take a reference implementation, and here reference implementation is the standard RISC-V ISA for a given microarchitecture. And then I am introducing, let's say, DSP-centric, which is the second group of measure, and finally, vector capability. So the net result is across the board, DSP-centric extension gives you a factor of 2, And if you sum up the effect of lightweight vectorization on the average 3.4 in this panel of kernels. Of course, I mean, if now I look at the energy improvement, a number of picojoule per produced output, I'm having something that from a single core perspective is proportional to what I have gained in terms of performance. So again, 3.6. Okay, so as you can see here, I mean, ISA, if one properly tailored, can play a significant role. We will see later on that parallelism is also amplifying the value of ISA specialization. So now going parallel is of course what we want to achieve is to be as close as a scaling factor by the number of core. If we have 8 core, we'd like to be very, very close from 8. So this is, of course, problem dependent, but fortunately in this field, I mean, there are lots of applications that are, easily parallel, that can be easily parallelized. So why do we want to go parallel? Of course, there is an obvious gain, which is, for the same workload, you distribute it, so you scale down the voltage, so you have something that is quadratic in terms of gain. The thing that is less obvious now is what parallelism is giving you in, from an energy improvement at a given voltage. So here we need to make sure that first, synchronizations are as efficient as it can be, because synchronization is fundamentally something that is sequential, and the more you have sequential section in a piece of code, the less you will scale. So you want to be sure that you are super efficient there. And then we also want to leverage on the fact that, most of our parallel programming pattern will be more or less the same code executed at different places in the working set. So there is a very large probability that if you have fetched one instruction for a core in a temporal neighborhood, you will reuse it. So meaning that you fetch once to execute multiple times. So, going parallel, I mean, a few comments on how we address it. So let's say that you have a master core that wants to dispatch several threads on, let's say, on a group of cores. The time it takes on our product from master taking the decision and our 8 tasks being up and running, including passing the argument, is something that is the order of 5 or 6 cycles. So you have little overhead here. And second, when we want to synchronize tasks, we want to make sure that, whenever the barrier has been passed, cores are back to life, quasi-instantly. So meaning that we block cores on barriers without flushing the pipeline, which means that when we wake up at the end of the cycle. So there is a little overhead, which means that from a performance scaling, we will not be impaired by our synchronization mechanism. So now, let's say if I am taking my benchmark set again and look at how we scale across the board. So you see that we, on the average, we scale by a factor of 7.7, which tells you that there is no major issue with the shared memory from a contention point of view, and that synchronization are working well. More interestingly is how do we scale from a performance? Again, I've told you before that the ISA enhancement is giving you a factor of 3.4. This factor of 3.4 is amplified by parallelism to a factor of 7. And this is coming from other effects, in particular sharing the caches, And this is assuming the same voltage, same frequency. So as you can see, you have one lever that is amplified by another one. Okay. Good news here is if I put myself from the point of view of if I look at those numbers from the point of view of the CNN, if you look more carefully, where we get the maximum boost is in the convolutional layers. This is typically the layer that represents 80% of the workload on a real-life application. So if I put all those things together, I mean, and if I do compare to, I've taken as a reference a dual-core microcontroller, state of the art, in 40 nanometers. So running Cypher 10, would take 100 milliseconds. If when we run it with the exact same network, and we get from a power point of view, assuming the same real time, factor of 16, and without hardware acceleration, then if I put into the picture additional resources for hardware acceleration, this gap is further amplified. So as you can see, the factors are well correlated, on a real network with the data I've been showing you before. Okay, so now about explicit memory management, which is our last level. Of course, the easiest solution is when you have a memory hierarchy is to cache it. So the point with cache, which is very cool from a software point of view, but from an hardware point of view, it tends to be quite power hungry. So this is something that we have avoided in what we have been doing. So we are left with one problem: is how from as a user, when I have to develop code, I don't want to bother with the subtlety of double, triple buffering, moving ties, etc., etc. So we have come up with a specific tool that which is addressing this problem. So characterizing kernels and making sure that you generate code where you interleave DMA transfer with tile processing. So you process a tile, you moving data for the next tile, and retile previous tile, everything simultaneously. It's like some sort of software-assisted cache, but using communication resources that are available on the chip. So the whole thing is based around the following idea. So you start from basic kernels, which are your usual, the place where you do the real job and you don't bother with memory. You assume that you have an unlimited amount of memory available. Then a user kernel is, where you do the actual job, and and it is characterized by an iteration space, multidimensional iteration space. Every argument is a subspace of this iteration space, possibly ordered in a different manner, and possibly with constraints like dependency on the neighborhood. At the end of the day, this is a set of constraints. I mean, relationship between arguments and properties to be satisfied, and then a budget that you give. You tell the tool how much memory you are ready to use across all the level of memories. High performance, level 2, and external memory. Then you end up with a set of constraints that we pass through a constraint solver, and we figure out how to time the working space. I mean, how to, for example, if you take a tensor, how to split the tensors into small tiles that you will move in and out in an optimal way. I mean, then finally, once you are done with a user kernel, you need to build a graph, which is a set of connected objects where you can solve another problem, is how you manage memory globally from a memory allocation point of view. So we are putting all those things together. And by the way, a graph can be more than inference. It can be also pre and post processing. Yeah? So to summarize, so we have basic kernels, user kernels, and a constraint solver. The whole thing run on PC, produce C code, which is a pipeline implementation that we compile on the target. And the good thing here is that we end up with an optimal memory layout where we can formally prove that we have minimized, data are always as close as they can be from the data path, and memory traffic is kept to a strict minimum. So typically, and then, I mean, this tool is used to write generators. So a generator, for example, could be, if I take this example, CNN layers. You say, okay, I want to have a layer with 5 input features, 1 output features, this dimension, pooling, padding, no padding. So it's a single line. And this is going to produce, an optimized pipeline structure for each layer that are connected together. So, if I take this small example that you are seeing here, so this is Cypher10, it's 3 lines of code to have everything described and generated. So then our last level is to go hardware. So on chip, we are having what we call an hardware convolution engine, which is a bunch of multiplier and a flexible architecture that lets you play with different precision trade-off. I mean, either 16-bit, 8-bit, 4-bit, and of course, the throughput you will get will be inversely proportional to your resolution. So basically, full resolution, you will deliver a full-blown 5x5 convolution per cycle. If you reduce precision, you could get 2, possibly 3 per cycle. So this is, of course, giving you performance boost and energy boost versus a pure software implementation. Of course, the point here is you need to keep in mind that what an hardware accelerator is giving you in terms of energy optimization is going to smoothly degrade when you drift away from the optimal configuration. And here, I mean, as soon as you deal with non-unit strides or dilation, the amount of data you need to recycle at every iteration increase, so you decrease the energy efficiency. Okay. So what does it give on a real-life network? Yeah? So as a first example, I will take keyword spotting. So here we are using one of the networks that has been made available by Google. Here we divide, we are having 2 periods, periods where we need to extract mail coefficient and classification. So as you can see, I mean, for 1 second of real-time speech, if we run full software implementation, we'll perform keyword spotting at, 2.3 milliwatts. And if we turn on the hardware accelerator, we are down to 1 milliwatt. So we can perform keyword spotting on 10 keywords, with a power budget of 1 milliwatt, which starts to be quite cool. Another example, which is a network that has been used by one of our customers to perform automatic reading in a complex environment. So it's a network with all familiar of training. Oops, sorry, there is something wrong. Okay, so anyway, apparently there is something that is not showing up on the display. Here the main message is, all familiar parameter starts to be a mid-size complexity network. The input image is QVGA, and classifying an image is something that, if we put into at work all the elements, software and hardware, we go down to 30 milliseconds. An interesting example is, autonomously flying drone that was developed by ETH Zurich. The principle is a ResNet network that has been trained with the Udacity dataset and generate a steering angle for a drone based on a front-looking camera, QVGA image, and also probability of collision. So this is running more or less at up to 18 frames per second. And if we reduce a little bit frame per second down to 6, 7, we are down to 40 milliwatts. So, vision-based autonomous flying, down to 40 milliwatts. Huh? Okay, so as a conclusion, if we do use proper optimization levels that I went through, being proportional to the problem you want to solve, playing with ISA extensions in being super efficient in the way you manage parallelism, possibly adding hardware acceleration, and then explicitly managing the memory in order to stick to the strict minimum in terms of memory traffic across the memory hierarchy, allow you to remain within the microcontroller, ultra-low power microcontroller power envelope, something in between half a milliwatt to few tenths of milliwatts for mid-size complexity classification problem, while we still remaining fully software programmable. So, and we believe that there are lots of applications, that are fitting pretty well with this definition, mid-size complexity on, with few milliwatts, because you can run on a battery and you can expect, months to years of autonomy if you play properly the duty cycling hypothesis.
All right, I think we have time for just one question.
Yeah, could the next speaker please also head to the back and get microphoned up while we're doing the Q&A? Or should I go away?
Can I go back to the first slide where you show the block diagram of the chip?
Which one?
The early slide where block diagram you show before.
This is a problem with animation. Okay, we got it.
Next one. Yeah, next one. Maybe.
Which
before. One? Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So, quick question. You have 8 RISC cores, and those cores are sharing the instruction cache, right?
They have a shared instruction cache,
Right.
yes.
So the question is, are they configurable? The number of cores you select and the size of the cache cache are configurable?
Yes.
Okay. Another one is you mentioned the master core supervising or managing the rest of the cores, core 0. Is it also selectable?
No, master worker is a logical definition in OpenMP parlance. It's from an OpenMP point of view, there is one thread that decide to launch a group of threads. But what is happening in reality, so everything is symmetric. So the master could be any cores, and when it dispatch a group of threads, the dispatch sequence also mutates the role of the master, where it is becoming a worker.
You picked RISC-V over ARM or other type of architectures. Is there a particular reason? What is your thinking about ARM versus RISC-V?
Do you want to stay on schedule? I don't know.
No, good question. At the end of the day, a core, honestly, a core is a commodity, but the point is you need to have a commodity that work exactly as you like. I mean, if I look to the previous talk from ARM, I mean, I see lots of the things that we have been doing, adding to the core for our very purpose. So we decided to use RISC-V mostly because we were having this opportunity to tune the core to our exact need. It was not available by ARM at that time. Maybe tomorrow we'll change our mind. So for the time being, we are having something that is relatively lightweight, easily adaptable to our needs, but backed up by a community. So,
How do you see RISC-V versus ARM today?
I mean, honestly, keep in mind what was on the first slide, 40 billion devices shipped. I mean, come on, there is room for everybody.